This is a Reforge reaction, and today I'm going to be reacting to Video Game Chronicle, or VGC. I'm going to be reacting to their review of plaguetale, and one of the reasons I want to react to their review is it sounds very similar to some of the things that I said. I didn't want to just eviscerate somebody's review who enjoyed the game, because I think there's tons of good things to say about it. I played the game for a couple of hours, and man, oh man, is it a beautiful game that's just mired in performance issues, which is so disappointing, especially in this generation of consoles that we're in, where we're seeing games hit amazing performance while also looking beautiful. So if you like this reaction video, be sure to hit subscribe, watch my other reactions, and I did play this over on my gaming channel. That's where I stream live if you want to check it out. So here it is, VGC News. They have their review. A Tale Requiem is an uneven adventure plagued by performance woes, an adventure through France where the real plague is the frame rate. I loved this. This was this is what made me want to read it and react to it. I haven't read it. I just read that and thought, let's do a raw reaction to their review. Here we go. It's a game that does many things well, but doesn't commit to any of them nearly enough. The stealth action is engaging, but it's broken up with clumsy combat. The game is visually stunning, but it runs poorly, and the story is compelling, but is broken up too often by needless, frustrating action, and even then, the narrative outstays its welcome long before the credits roll. So this is obviously somebody who played the game to completion. They think it's a little bit too long. I can't comment on that, but the other things I can comment on. The clumsy combat. One of the frustrating things about this game for me consistently is how you don't feel fully in control of the character. It's almost like there's invisible rails or constraints on your character that leads to it feeling clumsy or clunky. It's almost as if sometimes they want me to do things in such a particular way that my player volition is hindered. And I think that's one of the reasons the combat feels clumsy. I do agree the game is absolutely visually stunning. There were some amazing vistas and use of depth, and you can see all this stuff out in front of you and the towns, and just the beginning is beautiful. But man, oh man, it runs so bad. All of that kind of gets ruined because it stutters and it hitches, and it doesn't even maintain 30 frames per second. Even if somebody's going to come in here and tell me 30 frames per second is fine, I don't really notice a problem, it stutters and it hitches so much. I had a guy in my YouTube chat, he had never been there before, and he says, is YouTube acting up or is that the game stuttering? It's the game, right? And I actually think the story is quite compelling, well voice acted, and really enjoyable. I don't know about it being broken up by needless, frustrating action. I've not played enough to say whether or not I agree or disagree with that, but I do agree the story's great. The game's early areas marry long sections of walking through stunning environments with some stealth gameplay accented by slight survival horror. There's a great tension buildup when avoiding guards or using the array of weaponry at Amicia's disposal to serve those guards as an afternoon snack, but as soon as the game asks you to take an enemy's head on, the combat really shows its limits. So that is going to be a concern, right? What I just said about it feeling kind of clunky and kind of constrained, taking enemies head on is probably not enjoyable. There's an early section where you're tasked with evading a large group of enemies, wherein the game very heavily hints that you should just run forward. However, doing so will lock you in an endless loop of dying. I ran into a soft lock in the first game, and I was going to have to replay an entire section. That's actually why I never completed the first game. I just got frustrated, and at the time I was streaming a lot of other games, and I was streaming the first game for comedic effect. It was really funny to kill Hugo in creative ways, but the same thing happened in the first game, so it's pretty irritating to see something like that rear its head yet again in the second game. The only solution we found was to break into some kind of Erat's Benny Hill sketch where 4 lumbering guards chase us around a rock until we finally disengage their patrol cycle. We could then pick them off one by one using stealth, but it portrays a lack of polish in the gameplay that's at odds with how good the game looks. And that's beyond just the frame hitching. That's just there are mechanical moments that feel clunky and lacking in polish sometimes when you're sneaking around. There's another section not long after that when guards swarm into a barn and Amicia has to ward them off. Despite most of the preceding game highlighting that as soon as you're spotted, it's very likely you'll be killed, these guards slowly climb down from the higher section of the barn for you to endlessly smash their skulls with your sling. In one absurd moment, you go from a vulnerable character that's reliant on stealth to a doomslayer, racking up a literal pile of bodies. I actually will agree with this. There were a couple of times where I felt that juxtaposition. She seems like fragile, scared, oh my gosh, but she's also ruthless and almost relishes killing them at times, and there's just bodies everywhere. I even said, I'm gonna try and kill everybody, and it seemed pretty possible, but it doesn't seem necessarily in line with how, oh no, you've been spotted, you're dead, right? And I think that's always going to be a challenge with games like this, so I don't know if it's necessarily a fair criticism, because you have to have the threat of being discovered leading to death or capture, and then you got to redo the section, while also having the player feel kind of empowered to be, I'm stronger now, I've got better stuff, I'm stronger than I was in the last game. This is always a tension in games like the second Layers of Fear, where they had failable areas because they felt like in the first game you could never actually die, and they wanted that real threat to be there. But then the challenge for me was it was immersion breaking. Then instead of engaging in a section that's very scary, I'm engaging with a mechanic that must be mastered. And when I'm mastering a mechanic, it's not very scary. I'm counting to 3 or watching a light pass by. So I can see that tension probably existing in this game as well. Combat does evolve as the game progresses, including some strange sequences where it becomes the world's slowest third-person shooter, and these feel misguided. The lack of mobility of Amicia, despite being a sprightly young woman who can outrun tidal waves of rats, is frustrating. This is one of the tropes of horror games in general, when you try to create intensity by making someone move like a geriatric. It's not exactly a good experience. Here you can see just a smattering of screenshots. The game is just absolutely beautiful. The lack of a 60 FPS mode is so frustrating. I attribute virtually all of this game's performance problems to the lighting. It seems very much linked to the lighting. There was even a breakdown in a video where the guy showed it stuttering pretty heavily. It can't even maintain 30 frames per second. Keep that in mind. It's stuttering and dropping below 30 FPS, and it was because of the fire in the room. I think they're doing something with their own in-house engine with the lighting that just is not optimized or polished very well. The game is at its best when you're skulking through the thick brush, avoiding enemies altogether, or using rats to skin them alive. These more action-based sequences feel like an attempt to break up some perceived slowness in the quieter moments, which is a shame because it's where the game excels. I'll agree with that. I think the slower moments, the poignant moments, and the times where you're talking and hiding, I think can be very, very beautifully done and well written. A Tale Requiem runs the technical gamut from jaw-dropping to surrealist absurdity. The visuals, as we've mentioned, are astonishing. The world is lovingly crafted and gives a real sense of a location outside of the specific areas you'll find yourself in on your travels. The runtime on our adventure was greatly lengthened by the amount of time we spent in photo mode or just looking out over the horizon. Your screenshot button will be substantially worn down. Agreed, if you're standing still, it's beautiful. As long as you're standing still, it's a gorgeous game. The town in the opening few chapters feels like a hub in a grand RPG, teeming with side quests and shops to visit. Of course, this is all part of the illusion, as the second you stop walking forward to look at an NPC, you'll notice that they're less AI and more Disney World robot who's waiting for you to pass so they can begin their animation cycle for the people in the queue behind you. This was comically put on display in the first game by me. There was a woman being kicked, just kicked over and over, and if you stand there and watch, it just never ends. And obviously it was hilarious because it's like, oh man, she's really staying in there, she's tough, and this guy's just kicking her and wailing on her. She never dies. So this is, I think, part and parcel for how they create a sense of forward momentum in the story and just kind of, hey, this place is alive, but not really. I think that's okay. I'm not gonna quibble too much about that. However, while the visuals are show-stopping and among the best of the year, the game's technical performance really lets it down. In our review experience, the game's frame rate was consistently unstable and particularly fell to pieces when there was a lot of movement on screen, which in a game about millions of rats parading across every square inch of the ground makes for a poor experience. There isn't even a prioritized frame rate or visuals mode, so you're essentially stuck until it's hopefully improved in the future. There's a huge controversy right now having games come out touting, beautiful visuals, but not giving the player the option to say, hey, turn some of this off so I can have consistent frame rate. It's really damaging to the experience. I actually think this game's getting a bit of a pass because it's less action-oriented. It's less noticeable because it's sort of slow-moving a lot of the times. And Gotham Knights is obviously getting, pretty shredded for it because it's a more action-oriented game. It's going to be more noticeable in that game. But to be fair, they both committed the same crime. They really didn't tell anybody that, hey, you won't be able to turn any of this off. It's just always going to be at 30. And arguably, maybe Gotham runs a smooth 30. This game doesn't even run a smooth 30, and it should be criticized for that. There are also some odd choices with the visuals that'll make the experience even worse if you don't turn them off. The chromatic aberration makes the whole game feel like you've taken a bad pill, and combined with the frame rate issues and screen tearing, a game that is absolutely beautiful from an artistic perspective is cheapened by the poor technical performance. Thankfully, the absurdly high chromatic aberration and motion blur can be turned off for a crisp, beautiful experience. I always turn motion blur off. It's one of the first things I always turn off. Motion blur, screen shake, and virtually any other waste of I don't even know what to call them. They're not even pretty or good. They're just ugly when you turn them on. A Plague Tale Requiem is a sometimes compelling adventure weighed down by poor technical performance and simple, frustrating, repetitive gameplay. I don't know if the gameplay is frustrating and repetitive because I didn't play more than about 2 hours, and I found it to be an enjoyable content loop where you're adding things to your tool set and it's changing the puzzles and changing the way to get past. There are times where you'll die just because it's not crystal clear what you're supposed to do, and I think that's okay. There's always that good blend of, oh, over there, you need to do this. And then they might not say that. And then you might I missed a piece of hanging meat and just couldn't figure out, why couldn't I get past this spot? I would throw down some fire and it wasn't quite enough to get past. I didn't see another piece of meat hanging. And that was because I got lulled into laziness because you and your character and the character with you is constantly pointing things out and saying what you should do. One of the puzzles I solved, the kid literally solved it for me. He kind of told me what to do. We were hoping that was an indication of maybe there's future puzzles like that, and that was sort of training me. I didn't get far enough to know if that's true or not. Let me know in the comments below if the puzzles do get better, because the one with the things we were spinning with the planets was really cool, but he basically solved it for me. While the stealth action can be enjoyable and the puzzle elements of using the impressive hordes of rats to your advantage can be engaging, it's a game that introduces compelling ideas but never really capitalizes on any of them. Pair that with some dodgy AI and it's a game that, at its best, when the characters are simply walking through the world, talking to each other. It's, as I said, those are the more poignant, more memorable moments, reminiscent of the more story-driven games like The Last of Us, where those middle moments where people are talking are quite important. While the game is visually stunning, the technical issues that we ran into spoiled the experience. For a game that's party trick is overwhelming the screen with digital vermin, having a frame rate that cowers away like it's as scared of the rats anytime they're on the screen drains those moments of impact. It's well written, and the acting performances, while teetering over the edge of drama school absurdity, are appropriate for the middle-aged fantasy that the game delivers on. I didn't have any issue with the voice acting. I think it's actually quite good. By the end of our adventure, A Plague Tale Requiem, we felt like our expectations hadn't been met. While some of the core of the first game is well built upon, there are only so many times you can enter an open area swarm with rats before the impressive tech wears off. Our favorite parts of the game were legitimately when Amicia and Hugo were just walking through the beautiful world and listening to the great score. I'm glad they mentioned that. Yes, soundtrack is immaculate and very, very effective. Last paragraph here. There's a much better game somewhere beneath the ludicrous combat sequences and poor performance, but the second it becomes an action game, A Plague Tale Requiem lets itself down entirely, which happens far too frequently for our taste. I was extremely disappointed that they had such stellar voice acting, an amazing soundtrack, and these beautiful vistas and settings and places for you to experience. It's so juxtaposed against the darkness and the fear and the scariness, and yet the game runs so poorly. I actually felt like if you go back and play on an old console or play a really old game that just doesn't perform that well, that's what this felt like. It's doubly frustrating because the previous game built with the same engine, built with probably a lot of the same assets and animation sets, was given a next-gen update, and Digital Foundry did a video on it, and it runs at a rock-solid 60. So to me, that means this game could achieve that. You just didn't give us the option to. You didn't put in the work to allow us to say, hey, turn off all this extra stuff so we can have a nice, smooth 60 frames per second experience. And honestly, it doesn't even give a smooth 30 frames per second experience, and this is true on PC as well. This is not a console problem. Some of these games are seemingly putting in too much of the good stuff, the shiny stuff, not taking the time to optimize it, and it makes the games run poorly virtually everywhere. And obviously, consoles suffer the most because we can't go in and turn down resolution and check boxes to turn things off or set things to medium. We don't have that luxury. So this game and even Gotham Knights are looking like games that are going to be just mired in struggling to deliver what many are expecting as a standard these days. So if you like this Reforge reaction, let me know what you think in the comments below about this game or any of the other topics I addressed in this video. Check out my other reactions. Check out the gaming channel where I stream live. I will see you in the next Reforge reaction.